your body belongs to you, not to men.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there's a lot of cultural messages that would like to contradict that, but I am here to put a flagpole in the ground and say, your body belongs to you, not to men.
Yes. Hey everyone, I'm Thais Sky. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women by women on conversations that matter. Hello everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to season 2 of Reclaim the podcast. It is so exciting that I get to be here with you all for this second season of Reclaim. The first season consisted of 33 incredible episodes and conversations with brilliant women doing brilliant things, having brilliant ideas, sharing them vulnerably and powerfully on the podcast. I love every single guest. I stand by every single guest. That's important to me. I don't just have guests on that I'm lukewarm, mediocre about. Like, I have to love the work that these people are doing in order for me to feel good about sharing them with my audience. And so I vouch for every single one of those women who I had the pleasure of interviewing for season 1. Season 2 is here. Bigger, better than ever. You may have noticed a new intro. You may have noticed artwork, different artwork. I'm going all out for season 2 here, peoples. I'm excited for you to be on this journey with me. Now, there are 2 ways before I go much further. There are 2 ways you can continue to support this podcast beyond just listening. Number 1, if you're really enjoying the guests, if you're enjoying this production, please leave a review on iTunes. It helps with the algorithms, peoples. You know, like the more reviews that a podcast gets, the more people get to see this podcast. And so leaving a review would mean so much to me. And then a second way is you can join the community I have collected on Patreon. Patreon is this amazing platform where you get to support this podcast for as little as $1 a month. And I'm so for it. I'm so for this idea of using community support rather than getting advertisers. I want to make this podcast ad-free. So if you like that idea and you want to be a part of the Patreon community, you get some cool perks for being in the Patreon community, like a community call with me once a month. You also get access to the podcast episodes a day early and a couple other things. You can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky and you can learn more about the platform there. Okay, so those are the 2 ways you can support this podcast. Let's talk about Marcia. I'm interviewing Marcia Baczynski today. Marcia knows her stuff. When it comes to sex, when it comes to consent, when it comes to asking for what you want and navigating neediness. So let me read to you her bio. Marcia Baczynski is a well-known speaker, writer, and coach on sexual communication, relationships, and women's empowerment. Her primary mission is to help women and the people who love them to overcome shame and get in touch with what they truly want, romantically, sexually, and relationally, even if it's off the beaten path. Marcia is the co-creator of Cuddle Party, founder of the Good Girl Recovery Program, and co-creator with Midori of the Wanted Man Weekend Intensive. Since 2003, she has worked with tens of thousands of people through her private coaching, workshops, and group programs, and made appearances in hundreds of magazines, news stories, radio interviews, and podcasts. Marcia lives near Berkeley, California, where she spends a lot of time with her weirdo friends, hiking, and sailing. What you're going to be experiencing during this interview is a radical transformation in how I think many of us see sex, particularly as women. We've been indoctrinated with a very narrow narrative of what sex should look like. And it's time to reclaim pleasure, yeah? It's time for us to reclaim what sex could look like for us and really own that we have desires and that we have needs and that we're allowed to have those needs met. Radical concept, I know. So while you're listening to this podcast episode, to this interview, I should say, I want you to be thinking about your own relationship with sex. How did you learn about what feels good for you? What did you learn from school about what sex should look like? Have you asked your partner for what you want when you're having sex or in that intimate space? And what did that look like for you? Was it uncomfortable? Why or why not? Does your partner or partners support you in your desires around your pleasure? And now that you've listened to this, how do you want your relationship to sex to look like? Hello, hello, Marcia. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm super glad to be here.
I love your work. I love your presence. And I can't wait for everyone who is listening to get to know more about you. So let's start there. Why don't you share a little bit about what you do and who you are and all of the things?
So my name is Marcia Baczynski, as you know, and you can call me Marcia B. And the main things that I am up to in the world are working with women and people who love them to have better sexual communication, more ability to ask for what they want, set boundaries, say yes, say no, be in touch with your needs, all that good stuff in the context of intimate relationships. And a lot of my clients are sort of off the beaten path in terms of their relationship styles and that kind of thing. So I get into all kinds of really interesting little seasons of the sort of sexual and relational realm, and I really enjoy it, and it's really great.
How did you get into sex?
Well, so when I was a teenager, I was part of my sort of high school and college and HIV prevention peer counseling groups, and got kind of curious about that. This was in the 90s when the plague was still very much the plague, and it was kind of a scary time to come of age, and I was trying to make sense of it all. And my mom was a nurse, and she's a very conservative, religious Catholic woman, but she also really believed in giving me facts. And so I had a lot of just straightforward sex education from my mom. And I kind of figured out pretty quickly I was the only one in my friend group that really had a lot of just straightforward information about sex. So that kind of set me on the path. My mom says that when she explained how periods worked to me, the next day I promptly turn around and explain it to my brother, who was a half younger than me, and I did a good job. So I think I started at a really young age. And then I got really fascinated. Like we were teaching people how to, use condoms and, have safer sex. But what we weren't talking about as much was how do you actually bring up that you want to have sex with someone? And so that has been sort of the central question of my entire career is how do you, in that bare moment of vulnerability and desire and longing and maybe fear and uncertainty, bring up that you want something with someone? And how do you ask for what you want? So that's my jam.
This is why I love your work, because I feel like it brings up everything. Because I talk a lot about the worthiness wound, right? The sense of inadequacy that so many of us carry. Well, I feel like it comes out in such a big way when it comes to sex, because it brings up all of the things that we aren't taught about consent and boundaries and vulnerability and putting yourself out there and dealing with rejection in a way that doesn't exacerbate our sense of inadequacy. So I just love that you do this work because it's so important. It's so important.
Yes. All of that.
I wrote a Facebook status the other day. I was like thinking about how often we don't orgasm because we played the good girl.
Right.
How often the good girl mentality prevents us from orgasming. And it's been really fascinating for me to learn how often women don't orgasm. And the sex is predominantly, when we're talking about hetero relationships, sex is predominantly for the pleasure of the man. And I would love to hear, what are your thoughts around how we can begin to step into that, asking for what we want and saying, actually, you know what? Sex is for both of us. It's not just for you and your fucking needs. I got needs too, God damn it.
Yeah. Well, and this is an interesting thing, right? Because the research that we can get, it's hard to get really good, accurate research on sex because there's not a lot of people who want to pay for it. But the research that we have, about 30% of women experience pain always or frequently during intercourse.
Wow.
We know that intercourse is not the primary way that women tend to have orgasms. Some women can have orgasms that way. Many women can't. And because intercourse has been sort of put forth as like the end all be all of sex, like it's home run, it's the thing that counts, everything else is quote unquote foreplay in heterosexual sex. A lot of women feel like they're inadequate. They feel like they can't, something's wrong with them, that they can't come that way. And the truth is that's not how our bodies are built, right? A thing that a lot of people don't know is women have just as much erectile tissue as men do. And I should say people with vulvas and people with penises, just to be like specific about what we're talking about. But people with vulvas have as much erectile tissue as people with penises do. It's just internal.
Mm.
And they didn't even know this because nobody had bothered to study this
Of
for
course
like
not, because people with vulvas
ever.
don't matter. No.
Right. And this is like, I don't remember the exact dates, but I feel like this was in the late 90s or early 2000s that somebody really figured this out. So this is new information, quote unquote. And so like there's a lot that we don't even know about our own bodies. And so there's, one of the things I don't personally teach this work, but many of my colleagues do. Amy Jo Goddard is great. Betty Dodson's great. Of just learning what your own anatomy is and what brings you pleasure. And so I'm a big fan of self-pleasuring. I'm a big fan of using toys. I'm a big fan of self-discovery, of talking to other women and people with vulvas and people who've had these experiences, and learning about what actually turns us on. Because if we don't know, we can't communicate it to our partner. And I think another piece of this is that there's a sort of story that men know what they're doing in bed and that women don't, and that women are supposed to follow men's lead in the hetero dynamic. And I work with a lot of men and they don't know, and they don't know what they don't know, and they feel bad. At least the ones I work with great guys who are often I work with people who love women. So I work with guys who love women, but they often feel bad that they don't know how to please her. And like, no one's talking about her pleasure because no one knows how to. And so, and then you can add in, trauma and worthiness and all these other factors that make it kind of challenging to learn about our own desire and our own turn on and our own literal physical structures. It can be challenging, but I think that there's actually a space for that. So that's a very long answer, but
no, it's a brilliant answer. I'm so glad that you shared all that with us, because you're right. First, let's start with just the basic anatomy. So many women, so many people with vulvas don't know basic anatomy. I'm raising my hands right now because just a year ago, I didn't know the difference between a vulva and a vagina. A year ago. Marcia,
right.
I'm 28 years old. I just want to be clear here. I'm 28 years old and I didn't know until a year ago about my own physical anatomy. And we live in a society that this is the norm.
Right. Yeah. And just for those listeners who don't know, the vagina is the internal canal and the vulva is all of the external.
Yes.
Stuff.
So what we generally say as vagina, we
Yeah.
are usually meaning the vulva.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting to know our basic anatomy, I think, is a good first step. And then learning to pleasure ourselves.
Yes.
And I love that you said that, because I think that there's also a stigma there around that being dirty and that being gross and that being pornographic and that having to be somehow still for the male gaze and not for our own exploration and pleasure.
Right. And that's a huge thing, because so many women, and I would include myself in this, people who are socialized as girls, femmes, people who are on that side of things, often, like, it took me a long time to realize that I could be the agent of my own sexuality, that I was that because so much of what I had learned growing up, and this is very common with a lot of my clients, is to view ourselves through the eyes of another. I've heard so many women and femmes say, I am turned on when I know I'm desired, which is a totally legitimate form of turn on. However, if that's the only turn on available, it becomes limiting, because you need another person and you need the other person to show up a particular way. And then you get into these weird controlling behaviors of like shame, and you're not loving me right, and all of that kind of stuff that can get really screwy. And there's a lot to be said for just like, use your fingers and explore, get a mirror out and check it out, pick up Come As You Are or Sex for One. Those are both two great excellent books for learning about female anatomy and sexual response. And like, check, just see if they can find other avenues of pleasure that are not dependent on how someone looks at you. Not saying exclude that. If that's what gets you off, go for it. Like, I'm so for that. And that can be very fun and pleasurable, and you can have some sexy, fun power dynamics with that. But on a basic level, your body belongs to you, not to men.
Yes.
And there's a lot of cultural messages that would like to contradict that, but I am here to put a a flagpole in the ground and say, your body belongs to you, not to me.
Yes. So let's talk about then asking for what we want, right? Because I feel like that's kind of the third step. It's like, okay, so we start to figure out like, okay, this is what feels good. Let's ask for this in another. That to me feels terrifying. So what can we start to do to make that process not so terrifying?
Well, one, pick partners that care. I mean, for real, like if you're with people if you're dating whoever, men, women, whoever you're dating, um, that isn't helpful if they don't care.
Yeah.
And that seems like an obvious thing, but it's really not always obvious. And a lot of people who are socialized as girls are socialized to prioritize other people's needs, prioritize other people's sexual desires, their partners, whatever, just to like get enough scraps at the table to have a place to belong.
Yeah.
And so like ask yourself, is this person, that whether it's a long-term partner or somebody you're hooking up with that night, like does this person seem to give a shit about me at all and what I want and what I'm into? So that's the first thing. And like you can tell before you even get into bed on that. Like, do they ask about you? Do they ask about what you like? Do they, sort of assert their authority over you, or do they like ask for input from you in your at your dinner, or when you're like going to the movies? Like, do they always seem to get their way, or are you kind of getting to have input there? Which also gives a space to practice asking for what you want when the stakes are lower. And I'm a huge fan of that, because practicing asking for like, can I hold your hand?
Yes.
Will you, pick the restaurant tonight? Will you, may I pick the restaurant tonight? Like, whatever it is that you want, like just asking and putting it out there and seeing how they respond when it doesn't matter as much.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, and this kind of is a thing we do with our needs and with our desires, we make this mistake in our boundaries. We make this mistake of, well, I'll overlook it when it's not that big of a deal, because surely they'll definitely pay attention when it's important. And no, the opposite is true. If they're ignoring it when the stakes are low, they're going to ignore it when the stakes are high.
Oh, yes. And, I was just thinking about consent as you were saying that, because that's also a great place to practice consent for both partners. When you're walking down the street, hey, can you put your hand here? Hey, I actually really like it when you do this. Hey, I actually don't want to be holding hands right now. It's just so good that you're inviting people to start to practice when it's easier, because that feels like less daunting than right when you're naked. Let's talk about consent and boundaries and what I want.
Totally. And yeah, I mean, this is the thing that sort of fascinated me, was like, wait a minute, we're not talking about holding hands and kissing and making out and all these things. Those things just sort of quote unquote happen. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to be able to talk about safer sex. You actually haven't been talking all the way leading up to that.
Yeah.
And then people are like, oh, well, it interrupts the mood. And I'm like, well, first of all, if, you don't care about me being comfortable and happy, the mood should be interrupted. That's just my opinion.
Love you. I love you so much. You're my favorite person ever right now.
But it's true. If you don't care about my comfort and safety and happiness and like enthusiasm, then yeah, let's interrupt the freaking mood. Like,
yeah.
And then, just to like all of these smaller things. And I think a lot of people have this idea about consent, that it's about asking for permission, which is based on some very old and sexist notions of bodies and who they belong to. So permission is a form of consent, but what I prefer to think of consent as is an agreement about how we're going to play together, which is much broader than permission and also much sexier to negotiate for. And I actually have a free download if you guys want to get into like,
yeah, I'll put all the link in the show notes.
Yeah, askingforwhatyouwant.com/consent. But there's a free class on not only what is consent, but like how to actually make it sexy, and you can download that, and it's great. But yeah, we have this idea of like men are trying to get this, like women have the sex and men are trying to get it, and men have to chase women in order to get it, and women have to be the gatekeeper. So the permission model really puts women and femmes and physically smaller people and bottoms and all of the people who sort of are on the sort of receptive end of sex into this gatekeeper role. And we never learn how to be agents or express our desires, because the only thing we're supposed to do in that permission-based model is say yes or no. That's the only thing we're allowed to do. So other people get to have desires that they put on us, and then we're supposed to just say yes or no, but we're never supposed to like make a counter offer, or like, how about you could just go down on me for 20 minutes and then we go to sleep, or any of those kinds of things. And we're like, I want to just be serviced by you and have more orgasms than I can count. Can we do that tonight? Like, I have had a rough week. And I'll get you back next week. Like, like we don't learn to do that. And for some people, it's just like the thought of doing that. Like, wait, I could do that? Because we've never been taught anything other than you say yes or you say no. And you're just the gatekeeper. That's the only role you have. So what I like about the agreement model is both people get to come together and figure out how they're going to play. And this is something that as a queer person and I'm bisexual, so I sleep with people across the gender spectrum. I have a very wide range of gender tastes in terms of what I'm into. And that includes sleeping with het cis men. And cis, for people who don't know, means people who are, whose gender aligns with what they were assigned at birth. So if you were told you were a girl when you were born, and then you were raised as a girl and you identify as a woman, you're cis. Same thing for men. But yeah, so I sleep with people across the gender spectrum, including het cis men. And what I have learned, or what my experience has been, and I've had this corroborated by a lot of other queer women, is that with queer sex, there's a lot more turn taking. There's a lot fewer assumptions about who's doing what. Everyone kind of has to learn how to advocate for what they want, because there's no script that you're following. And what I've seen in more heteronormative sex is that there's this script, and breaking that script for, I'll just say men and women in this case, because we're talking about heterosexual sex, can be very, very challenging for both sides. Because like, we can say, oh yeah, women should have what they want in bed and all this kind of stuff. What I also see is men also get punished by women when they express vulnerability, when they express wanting to receive, when they express not wanting to be in charge. So the sexism hurts everyone in heterosexual sex, right? And so what ends up happening is people follow the script, and the script you can see in porn, and the script you can see in romance movies. It's like, he's supposed to just pursue her. He's the one that has the desire. He's supposed to run the fuck. She's just supposed to either go along with it or like repel his advances and then eventually go along with it, which is rapey. Or sometimes if it's true love, she can be enthusiastic about it, but she's still just saying yes or
and
no.
she doesn't orgasm.
And she doesn't work. Or maybe she does, but it's because he knows what he's doing, not because she knows what she's doing. And so that script is how a lot of people are having sex. And what I've found, running the range of queerness and polyamory and kink and talking with my clients and working with students over the years, is that getting out of that script is ask for people who are in heteronormative relationships, for men, for women, regardless. And it starts with those vulnerable moments of asking for what you want on smaller things. Like, I don't like it when you grab my head. Can you put your hand on my back instead? Or can I put my hand on your back? Do you like it when I do this to you? I like doing this to you. Do you like it? That's a consent conversation. I like doing this. Do you like it too?
Yeah.
And then the other thing about consent is that a lot of times we, operating from this permission-based model, we ask for permission. We say, is this okay? And I hate that question so much, because one,
talk about a mood killer,
right?
Legit.
It's a mood killer, legit mood killer, not sexy, not hot. Don't know what you're asking. Are you asking if I can tolerate it and I won't cry very much? Like, is that what you're asking? Like, what are you asking me right now? Are you asking me if I'm still going to love you tomorrow? Are you asking me, like, what is this okay? So yeah, I don't like that question. I think
Clearly.
also we should aim for better. I think we should be aiming for good. Is this fun for you? Is this good for you? Are you enjoying yourself? Is this okay? It's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. But this is why consent gets a bad rap, because people do it badly.
Yes,
Is
absolutely.
this okay? I'm touching your hand. Is this okay? Like, no, don't do that.
So, based on your experience, have you found that people that are in long-term relationships have more challenges with this? The reason why I ask is because I see in so many of my friendships where they've been together for a long time, things kind of just peter out, and it feels in many ways intimate because they know each other so well, but also kind of boring and kind of monotonous and kind of the same thing over and over again. And so it kind of just fizzles out. And I'm curious if that asking for what you want is a part of that.
Absolutely. So there's a few things about long-term relationships. And one is that whatever we started with is often what we end up with, which is why I'm such a big, huge advocate of be relentless about asking for what you want at the very beginning of a relationship, and set the tone from the get-go that you both can do that, and that yes is okay and that no is okay, and that it's okay to change your mind. Like, do all of that from the get-go, and be willing to lose potential relationships from the get-go if people are like not up for that. So how you start the relationship is often how things will go. And also, when we start our relationships when we're relatively young, we come into that with the skills we have as 23-year-olds, as 24-year-olds, as 30-year-olds. Like, if you're 70, even 40 is young in terms of our sexual skills. So whatever we come into the relationship with in terms of skills is what we often end up with, unless we recognize that sex is actually a skill and that can be learned. And so
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time for the people in the back?
sex is a skill that can be learned.
I feel like for so many of us, we just kind of operate under this idea that it's innate, it's biological, so you should just know what to do. And if you suck at it, or if they suck at it, then that's a personal issue, and all you can do is break up with them.
Yeah, so there's reproductive sex, which is biological, and we have instincts for that, but we have nothing having to do with, like, pleasure has nothing to do. And even you'd be surprised, actually. I mean, I worked for San Francisco Sex Information. It's a free hotline you can call and ask questions about sex. Anyone can call. Y'all should use it. sfsi.org. But people would call and, like, they literally just had no idea even how to have reproductive sex. So people don't know. Like, we have urges to, like, hump things, but that's kind of all we have. Making it fun or pleasurable and learning your partner is a skill, and learning yourself is a skill.
Yes.
And it's like food, right? So, like, can you throw something in the microwave every night? Yes, you can. Can you make the same dishes every night for 40 years? Yes, you can. But sometimes you want to get a cookbook out, and sometimes you want to take a cooking class. And that doesn't mean you're a terrible eater or a terrible food person. It just means that, like, I don't know. Look, Italian food. I want to learn that. So.
You're the best thing in the entire world. I'm cracking up over here, and I'm trying to, like, hold back so people can hear you, but oh my gosh, you're making me so happy. I think that is a great way to look at it. Let's take a step back. Sex is serious, and it is so not that serious. It's important, and it's so playful. And I think we've just all, maybe collectively society, we're like anal retentive, and we've kind of forgotten that so much of sex is supposed to be a joyous occasion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sex is an opportunity for adults to play. And this seems really obvious, but sometimes we just get into a habit. I've had clients where, they've been trying to have a baby, and so the sex has become very goal oriented, which is fine when you have a goal of getting pregnant. But the joy and the spontaneity that we often have early in our relationships that we lose is that it is playful and it's discovery. And so when you start to think that you know everything about your partner and you don't inquire more deeply, or when Honestly, a lot of it is that, like, if I don't know my body and I don't know what turns me on and I am not curious about myself, it's going to be really hard for my partner to discover things about me, unless they're very creative and inventive themselves. And then I see a lot of people blame their partner for not being adventurous, or, it's like, oh, they should be initiating that. Well, okay, but what are you bringing to the table?
Yeah.
Like, why isn't my partner cooking me new Italian dishes every night? Oh, God. It's like, well, have you told them that you'd like that? But we think that if it's love, or if it's meant to be, that it'll just happen.
Yeah.
And the truth is that that's
Well, I mean,
not
but look at what we're fed, right? I mean,
right. Yeah.
99% of movies where the couple comes together, they just magically have great sex.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's it. And that's an affirmation that they're meant to be, because they don't even have to have this conversation. They just know.
They just know.
And we don't just know. That's not how it works. Most of the times,
No.
it requires a little bit more effort,
Not
Well,
to mention, though, that your body changes over time. So what worked in your 20s isn't necessarily going to work as well in your 40s.
Right.
There's childbirth, there's stress for work, there's being caught in dual caregiver relationships where you're raising children and taking care of your parents. That's really stressful. There's changes in hormone levels as you age. There's disability that comes with you as you age. There's so many things. And I think it's not just that we think that sex is supposed to just work. It's that we have a young person's idea of sex in our head. That everyone's able-bodied, everyone's thin, everyone's, parts fit together in a way that is comfortable and pleasing. Everyone's sexual appetites are similar. And that's just not the case. I mean, it's just not.
Yeah.
You have people with, like, wildly varying genital sizes trying to get together with somebody who has a different, like, an incompatible genital size, or, somebody had a hip replacement, or, there's starting to be so many really great resources out there for, Elle Chase has a book called, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a book for fat girl sex. And it's just this, like, great book about sex positions for bigger bodies, which you don't see very often. And Joan Price has some great books on aging and sex that are really fun to read, and I enjoyed them because it's like, oh, right, this is going to happen to all of us. We might as well prepare for it. Right. I'm a good student.
You are.
I like doing my homework in advance.
Okay, so I know that you have a thing coming out, or is out for people around neediness. I want to hear everything about this. Tell me everything.
So I have been thinking a lot lately about this idea of being needy and how problematic it is, because needy feels like a word, much like bitch or slut, that we use to, like, bludgeon ourselves and other people, often women, femmes, people on the raised as girls. People who are often vulnerable and marginalized already, for having needs, and for those needs being not met. And
they're clingy, they're daddy's issues.
Yeah, like, just those kinds of things. And then I watch a lot of my students and clients, especially the ones that I would categorize as the good girls, who are like, I have a recovering good girl recovery program. But what they often try to do is they try to just not have needs.
Yes.
And that is the fastest way.
Independent.
I'm independent. I'm autonomous. I don't have needs. I don't need anybody to help me. That is the fastest way, in my experience, to actually become needy. And the fastest way to not be needy is to embrace the fact that you have needs and to march straight towards that. The other thing about needs is that not only do we all have them, like, as long as you have a goal, they're all related to goals. Like, as long as you have a goal of staying alive, you need to breathe. And, if you have a goal of running a 7-figure business, you have needs to make that happen. Like, needs are really just about dependencies for goals, or for, like, intended outcomes, right? So this idea of not having needs and not taking up space and not not being like, not like making yourself wrong for being clingy and all of that. I think it's really a product of how capitalism kind of wants us to be good little workers and cogs in the machine, and how also in a lot of family systems, sometimes the parental unit was so not able to take care of their young person that the young person really got that the only way I can stay safe is to not have needs. So I think that the capitalism and the family systems can come in and reinforce each other in a very upsetting way. But the truth is we all have needs. And so the only way to not quote unquote be needy is to march straight towards that fact and embrace it, and then get very creative about how to address that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this sounds also like in alignment with attachment theory, and the sense that, you know, we need to be attached to people. And that means as we grow up, we need to be attached to partners. It's actually very, very healthy to be attached to other people.
Absolutely.
And it's heartbreaking that our culture is so individualistic, it so perpetuates this narrative of the individual, while also, you know, we can see that no one thrives being alone.
Correct.
So we have both. We both know that being alone doesn't allow us to thrive, but we live in a culture that tells us that we need to do everything and figure out by ourselves. So that creates such an isolating experience, and it's heartbreaking.
It is absolutely heartbreaking. And I think it also really speaks to the ways that historically prioritize narratives of usually straight white men, and invisibilize the labor of the white women around them and the people of color around them who are doing all the labor to make this independent man happen.
Yes.
You know, and, you know, I think a lot about how when in the United States, how as people were moving west, as white people mostly were moving west and taking over the territories, quote unquote, there's this narrative of like the rugged individualist. And I'm like,
the cowboy
and all that. I'm like, wait a minute. The government was building the railroads, and the government was subsidizing the stuff. And the government was saying like, this land is yours and we're going to use our army to like kill all the native people so you can have it. Like, how is that individualist?
Right.
That is not remotely that. And so I think about that a lot, and how, you know, we have these narratives of being able to take care of yourself. Like, just, yes, of course we want to have autonomy, but we don't want to be isolated. And those are different things. You know, we do have a basic need for autonomy. We don't want to feel subjugated to someone else. We want to feel like we have some sense of autonomy over our lives. But that's a different thing than being independent. And like, the truth is we're primates, we're apes. If you look at ape culture, all the apes, both the aggressive chimps and the like lovey-dovey
ape culture,
like ape culture, they have cultures. Animals have cultures. I will fight anybody who says animals don't have cultures, man. Talk to me after you've seen an elephant bury their dead and mourn it, you know? But yeah, so if you look at, you know, chimps and bonobos, who are two closest relatives, like they live in groups, and the structure of those groups is different, but like we belong in groups. And this sort of atomization and isolation creates depression, it creates anxiety, and our needs aren't getting met, and then we feel bad because we're quote unquote needy. And the truth is
yes,
our culture's really crappy at helping us meet our basic needs, and we need to change that. And one of the ways we change that is by marching straight towards like, I'm needy and everybody around me is needy, and that's okay. And there is no society on earth that has been built by people who are not incomplete, needy, full of flaws. And why do we have to be perfect to have any of these good things? Like, that's dumb.
yes.
So.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so I'm feeling needy, or I've been accused of being needy, or I'm in a relationship where my partner calls me needy and I want to do something about this. What's something that I can start considering or thinking about to move away from this energy of that unhealthy dependency for my happiness and validation, etc., into more sovereign while also being connected? Loaded question, I know.
Well, no, and it's a good question, and I think the specifics of that answer are going to vary from person to person.
Absolutely.
I think it does start at this very base level sometimes of setting boundaries, which I have a course on boundaries also. Setting boundaries with the people that drain you where you can. Doing things not in a like big glamorous Instagram ready way, but like literally just on a day-to-day basic level. Do things that bring you joy. Like just little, like if you like painting, paint. If you like writing, write. If you like being in nature, go be in nature. Like just do those things, which is starting to meet your basic needs, because
Yes.
those are the things. And we often deny ourselves those things because we think we don't deserve them.
Yeah.
And
And
that's backwards. We
and
will feel we deserve them more the more we do them.
yes, absolutely. And I feel like neediness is just misdirected energy. So if we can just, it's kind of like when you put a pot over a boiling water, the water needs to go somewhere, but if you lift open the pot, the water kind of simmers back down, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
same to me. I feel like it's the same thing. It's like if my partner's calling me needy, it's because I'm not feeling my needs are met.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to have a conversation with him,
Well,
with myself, to
or he might
see.
be controlling and trying to like get out of that. Like,
Absolutely,
that
absolutely, of
word
course.
does get thrown around as a way to control people.
No, I see
Say
that.
your needs are not convenient for me.
Yes,
That's not needy. That's you
yes,
having a problem with my reality.
absolutely. So yes, that discernment of, am I actually genuinely okay? I can admit it. I am being quote unquote needy, or actually I just have needs, and you are seeing it as needy as a form of oppression.
Yeah. And I think
Important.
that discernment is really, really important,
It's critical.
because what I see people do in the face of somebody telling them they're needy is shut themselves down and they just try to take up less space.
Yes.
So if your partner or your mom or your friend or whoever says, "Oh, you're so needy," there's an interesting thing. Like, is it that there's something that you think that I need to be addressing in my life, or is it that you can't cope with my reality? Because if they can't cope with your reality, boy, bye. Like, I don't need that. You don't need that. That's not going to help you actually be less quote unquote needy, to have somebody, shut
Well,
you
it's
down
just
for
like
trying
when
to get your
people,
needs met.
it's like when people say you're too much, It's like,
Exactly.
am I too much, or are you too inadequate to deal with my muchness?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
right? Or are you too small and you can't handle my muchness? But I love that you're shifting that conversation and having that discernment, because I do see that is critical. There's so many times that we want to place the burden of blame on us versus
Mm-hmm.
really acknowledging what's happening in the situation.
So regardless of either a well-intended comment or a controlling comment, if someone's saying like, "Oh, you're needy," the response is not going the correct answer is never going to be shrink down smaller and try to take up less space. That's not
Yes.
going to get you where you want to be.
Preach.
Um, and if it's a well-intended comment, it's worth exploring with that person, whether it's your friend, your parent, your partner, whoever. Can you say that in a way that's more helpful to me? Like, what are you seeing that I'm
Mm,
not aware of, that I could work on? Like, can you rephrase that in a way that's actually like useful to me rather than just this loaded term?
yes.
And if it's somebody that's not making a well-intended comment, question what the hell they're doing in your life,
Mm-hmm.
because trying to get it is a power move that a lot of people employ in romantic relationships, in familial and parental relationships, in friendships, to be like, I'm going to try to get you to be more convenient for me by calling you a name that I know has a hook for you. And so that discernment is important.
Yeah. It's interesting in my relationship. Oh, he's gonna hate that I share this, but he doesn't listen to the podcast, so it's fine. I have a lot of need to have my own space.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that I need and that I'm owning and that I'm claiming for myself. I need a lot of alone time. And he likes to be in my space, constantly. He loves to be around me, on top of me, in me, everywhere, just around my space. And so I have to have that conversation with him constantly,
Mm-hmm.
of I'm feeling like you need something from me that I can't give you right now.
Mm-hmm.
How can I meet you here? How can you
Yeah.
meet me here?
And that's a great conversation because it's collaborative at that point. It's like, I see that you have this desire. I have these needs. Neither of them are wrong. Both are totally fine. Both are totally legitimate. Now let's get creative about how do we do this dance? And then it becomes a dance, right? It becomes like, sometimes there's more space, sometimes there's more closeness, and it's a constantly navigating thing. And that is the nuance of relating with people but we can't do that if we can't own it.
But I do notice myself, Marcia, like especially when I'm frustrated, wanting to say or wanting to be like, you're so goddamn fucking needy. Like, give me, like, back the fuck up because you are being so needy right now. You're being needy. I can't handle it. But I'm noticing, because I want to be in this relationship and people don't like being called names, right? I'm noticing how, one, that doesn't help, but two, it has nothing to do with him.
Right. It's about your needs.
It's about me and my needs. It's not that he's extra needy. It's that I'm perceiving it based on what's happening within me right now.
Absolutely.
And that has been so critical to our relationship. Our relationship wouldn't have survived if we weren't willing to engage in this dance.
Mm-hmm. And I find that people tend to go to adjectives and nouns rather than verbs because it's easier to call names than it is to talk about behavior and to say, like, this is what I have available for you. It's vulnerable to say, this is what I have available for you. I know that you want more. Are you still going to love me if this is all I can offer you?
Yeah.
Like, that's vulnerable. It's much easier to go, ugh, you're so needy.
Yeah.
But like, if this is what I have, I love you. I want to be in this relationship with you. I have all these needs for alone time. I go crazy if I don't have that. I need alone time to be my best self. Are you going to leave me? Are you going to abandon me? Are you going to be mad at me if I set this boundary?
Yeah.
And that dance it's so much more vulnerable to own the truth of that, and so much easier to just go, oh God, you're so fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I'm going to blame you for this.
And I found that I've only really been able to claim my space because I feel secure that he won't leave me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Only when we've established a secure connection have I felt like, I know that you're there for me. I know that you're there. I don't need you in my space right now. You know, it's really interesting how amazing relationships can be at deepening our capacity to be with our stuff.
Yes.
We allow it to be.
Yes. And that's why that actual discernment about, is this person caring about me and just expressing it in a clumsy way, or are they trying to control me? That discernment is a really important one, because if you're in a relationship where it is safe, you are wanted, they care, and we all have our bad days on communication. We say things in a bad way, and they're telling you, oh God, you're so needy. That's a different thing. But like, yeah, okay, let's work together to figure out what that is. Like, are you needing space? Are you needing time? Like, what is it that you're wanting over there when you say I'm needy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I'm going to have you take some responsibility for that.
Yes.
So it's not all on my plate and my needs.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on all of this? Any critical ideas that we haven't addressed? I mean, you just have such good shit out in the world that I feel like I could talk to you about all the things all the time, but
I could talk for hours with you. This is so fun. Well, I know that you do a lot of work with people on worthiness, and I guess I would just say that a lot of the work that I'm doing, I focus a lot on really practical. How do you say the thing? How do you express the boundary? How do you say the need? How do you ask for what you want in bed? How do you do consent? Like, these are the things I do, right?
Yeah.
But so much of that is grounded in, like, I feel like it's okay to do this. I feel worthy of having access to this. So I just really love how that dovetails so nicely together.
I mean, our work definitely complements each other brilliantly, because, you know, I really focus on more of the healing and the deeper energy work, right? And then you come in perfectly with that. Okay, let's do the thing.
Let's do the thing.
Let's do the thing. And so just as a quick reminder to all of you, we are all worthy of delicious sex. We are worthy of delicious relationships. We are worthy of God, of feeling good in our bodies, regardless of what that looks like and how it aligns with whatever the cultural shit is.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you deserve not just quote unquote sex, but like the actual kinds of sex you like.
Absolutely. Whatever
That
sex
is.
looks like for you.
Which could be like hours of making out in a very slow and sensual way, or it could be like getting tied up and spanked, or it could be like very vanilla heteronormative, and if you like that, freaking go for it. It could be like weird swinging off the rafters,
Or just by yourself in your bedroom
or
with
it could be with
all the
groups,
toys.
and it could be like literally whatever you want.
Anything. It's totally good.
And then the how to get there, because it's a skill.
It's a skill. We're learning from Marcia today.
You just have to learn how to do it.
I love it.
And not knowing how to do it doesn't mean you're not worthy of it. We aren't born knowing this stuff.
And that right there, I think that's it.
Yes.
Like, that's it. Mic drop. Brilliant moment. Thank you so much, Marcia, so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I really appreciate you.
This is great. Thank you so much for having me.